Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Mr. McMahon is the iconic rivalry that captivated millions of viewers, and in this new series we will dive into the most famous WWE storyline of all time that transformed pro wrestling in a real cultural phenomenon. You will learn where the idea for the Stone Cold character came from and the ridiculous names he almost had initially, how his rivalry against Vince McMahon was the result of several unlikely combinations of circumstances, how the company's big boss reacted when he saw the catchphrase Austin 316 for the first time, and even the very surprising person who had the idea of setting up a match between the two men. You are on the Wrestling Paradise, Stone Cold Steve Austin against Mr. McMahon, the iconic rivalry that captivated millions of viewers, Episode 1. Let's go.
Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass.
To fully understand the brilliance of this rivalry between Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon, we have to go back in time to see how this storyline was created. First of all, let's take the case of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Long before making Vince McMahon's life miserable, he had a career that was far from easy, and we could even go so far to say that it's almost a miracle that the Stone Cold character even existed at all. When he arrived at the Stamford Federation in 1995, Steve Austin already had behind him a failed stint at World Championship Wrestling, where Eric Bischoff, the president of this company at the time, fired him considering that he would never sell tickets. Despite everything, he had been able to have a period at ECW alongside Paul Heyman, and there we saw what Steve was capable of when he was given the opportunity to express himself. But the moment he arrived at the WWE, Vince McMahon directly decided he would be the Ringmaster character, and that he would be managed by Ted DiBiase Sr., who will always speak for him. Backstage, McMahon had instructed Vince Russo, the one who would soon become the main writer of the shows, that Steve Austin should not say a single word. Can you only imagine how this decision could have ruined his career? It is even more incomprehensible that when he was at ECW, Steve was doing excellent promos. But according to Russo, Vince McMahon had not seen any of it when he signed him. But you will see that, in the following years, nothing will happen as we could have imagined. Steve quickly realized this Ringmaster gimmick didn't fit him, that he needed to talk on the microphone. They will then give him the opportunity to think about a character that he would like to be, an opportunity that Steve will not miss. One evening he is at home watching a documentary about Richard Kuklinski, a hitman who allegedly worked for the Mafia for years, and who was nicknamed the Iceman. He saw this cold, emotionless individual and thought he would like to go in this direction. After telling the officials, they are going to brainstorm for the name of his character, and they are going to offer him several names that Steve absolutely hated. Otto von Ruthless, Ice Dagger, Fang McFrost. But an ideal name will be found, and in a rather funny way. Steve's wife at the time, Jeannie Clark, made tea for him one day, and while they were talking, she told him to drink it before it was stone cold while pronouncing this sentence. She spontaneously told him in the process that they had found his name, Stone Cold Steve Austin. They didn't know it yet, but this idea was going to make history forever. Over the months, Stone Cold will improve more and more in this role. Look at his intensity, his ferocity. When I see him, I see an angry man, a badass, someone you better not bother. And for Steve, it wasn't even really acting, it was how he felt inside after all these years when people didn't believe in him. He says his Stone Cold Steve Austin character came from all those years when he was told he wasn't good enough. He has been set back enough times for him to tell himself he was going to do things his own way now, and if someone stopped him from doing it, he would kick his butt. Despite everything, he had to fight to succeed. For example, he used to harass Vince Russo every day so that he would let him talk more on the shows. He will manage to be on commentary of some matches where he was finally able to speak. But even there, he realized that some of his sentences had been cut during the editing, which deeply disappointed him. He went to Vince McMahon in his office, telling him he is 6'1" tall, 240 pounds, bald with a goatee, black trunks and boots. Without his personality, he couldn't perform, but he told him that if he let him talk, he could put him against anyone. While until now, McMahon didn't give much importance to him, he began to like Stone Cold very much to push him. And the reason is amazing. Vince simply recognized himself in Stone Cold. He saw an individual who is alone against all, who also had to fight. Against the world, he also appreciated Austin's commitment in his role, since, as Vince said, Steve put his heart and soul into this character. From then on, nothing was going to stop him. At King of the Ring in June 1996, something historic is going to happen. In a spontaneous moment that Steve had actually been waiting for months, one of the best promos of all time is going to take place. A first element I find mind-blowing. is that Triple H was originally supposed to win the prestigious King of the Ring title. That success is traditionally a guarantee for a big push, but a month before the show, he was involved in the curtain call incident at Madison Square Garden. It's a scene where, with Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, they decided to completely go out of character in front of everyone by hugging each other to say goodbye, since Nash and Hall were leaving for WCW, except that they were supposed to hate each other. They made a whole part of the spectators realize they were just playing characters. All that while in the business, on the contrary, everybody was trying to protect the spectators' suspension of disbelief as good as possible. So Triple H was going to be punished for this scene, and it was finally Stone Cold Steve Austin who would become the King of the Ring. And after his victory in the final against Jake Roberts, who often spoke about the Bible, Stone Cold will say a famous phrase: "You talk about your Psalms, you talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says, I just kicked your butt." He will conclude these legendary words with a new catchphrase, and that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so, subsequently. The expression Austin 3:16 was going to be a success like never before, and the t-shirt that uses it will become the best-selling wrestling product of all time. Can you only imagine how different the story would have been if this infamous curtain call incident had never happened, and if Triple H had indeed won this tournament? And for the record, after this promo that became legendary, Vince Russo, who was in charge of the Raw magazine at the time, put the expression Austin 3:16 on the cover because he was convinced it would be huge. But when he showed it to Vince McMahon, the latter told him that he didn't like it, that he had to change the cover. In any case, what's for sure is that the Texas Rattlesnake's career had taken off. Despite his heel role, he was more and more loved by the fans. And it should also be emphasized that commentator Jim Ross played an essential role in it. For example, Austin tells that it was Ross who had the idea of calling his finisher the Stunner, but also to nickname him the Texas Rattlesnake, which will become iconic. As Steve says, Jim Ross came up with these nicknames on the spot spontaneously while commenting. He is eternally grateful to him because with his comments he helped to build the Stone Cold character. This rise will result in a victory at the 1997 Royal Rumble, then a legendary match against Bret Hart at WrestleMania 13. On that day, Austin and the Canadian will face each other in a submission match, and something great will happen in my opinion. First, I would like to say that I love that match, and that it has all the fundamental ingredients of a good wrestling match in my eyes. We have two believable characters who seem to hate each other and who destroy each other in a fight where both men absolutely want to win. And above all, the finish was very well written. While he is suffering a sharpshooter which usually makes wrestlers give up, Stone Cold refuses to tap out while he is bleeding in a memorable visual. He prefers to pass out rather than let Bret Hart beat him. And even if the Canadian is the winner, Steve Austin looks like a hero who didn't give up despite the pain. And the genius of this scene is that Stone Cold does a face turn at that moment, becoming a nice guy we want to support, while Bret Hart turns heel. It is therefore a double role reversal, about the blood pouring down Austin's face, which the Federation wanted to avoid at that time. Vince McMahon said he was a little upset about it, but that what matters is never what he wants, but what the audience wants. He was listening to the fans' reactions and they were going crazy. As an executive of the Federation, Vince was upset because Stone Cold hadn't respected the company's rules, but he gave the fans what they wanted. Now Stone Cold Steve Austin was therefore a babyface, even if he is anything but a traditional nice guy, given that he was politically incorrect in his language, that he did middle fingers, that he wasn't smiling but on the contrary always pissed off. We can say that he was rather an anti-hero who was loved by the fans. The next big step in Stone Cold's rise will take place at SummerSlam in 1997. Against all odds, it will gradually give birth to his rivalry with Vince McMahon, in a combination of circumstances that still makes us realize how pivotal events in the history of a company can sometimes come out of nowhere. Stone Cold faced Owen Hart for the Intercontinental Belt, which could become his first singles title in the company. But that day, his life almost turned upside down in the wrong way. During the match, Owen Hart will do his piledriver move, except that he will execute the maneuver incorrectly and Austin will brutally land on his skull and break his neck. As Steve says, he couldn't feel anything below his neck anymore. He thought he was never going to be able to walk again. He was almost paralyzed for life, and Steve will still manage to win this Intercontinental title. But at what cost? Because at that moment we may have several very serious questions. Will he be able to continue pro wrestling, or is his career over? If he can continue, how much time will he need to recover? But also, what is the Federation going to do without its new golden goose while it is in the middle of a ratings war for several years against the rival WCW Federation? Also considering that the latter had taken over for quite a while at that time. Fortunately, Stone Cold won't have to retire. But the worst part is that he can't have real matches for several months. So here we are facing a real question. How can we still have Steve Austin in the shows while he isn't cleared to wrestle? And this is the amazing side of the upcoming rivalry between Steve and Vince McMahon. This injury will be used in a creative way to give birth to this storyline, which could have never happened without this big issue. In the end, Stone Cold is going to be at war with the Federation's authority figures who refuse to let him wrestle again, not to risk aggravating his injury while he was already ready to go back. But given that he will be considered unfit to defend his Intercontinental title, he will be forced to vacate it, which will drive him crazy. From now on, he is more than ever a rebel who will never let himself be controlled by his superiors. And the rest will be history. In his rebellion against all those who prevent him from coming back, he is going to do his awesome stunner move to Jim Ross, to Sergeant Slaughter, who was the Monday Night Raw commissioner, but above all, on September 22nd, 1997, at Madison Square Garden. He is going to do it to Vince McMahon. Look at Vince's mind-blowing selling, trembling, some incredible acting. We must realize what this legendary scene represents at that moment. For the first time, Vince McMahon has just been physically involved in an on-screen angle while he had always been confined to a commentator role. And by the way, Jim Ross said about this famous stunner that Vince got talked about a lot after this stunner. He thinks it was the ugliest stunner ever, but at that moment in 1997, this first stunner on Vince McMahon was one of the most important moments in Raw history. In the aftermath, Stone Cold is going to be arrested by the police, embodying insubordination more than ever, and I think he's perfect in this role. And it's interesting to note that Triple H said that the creation of the Stone Cold character is 90% Steve, and the nuances of what he could do as a rebel came a lot from Vince. In this rivalry where everything is gradually falling into place, the next crucial chapter happened at Survivor Series on November 9th, 1997 in Montreal. On that day, Stone Cold will regain his Intercontinental title against Owen Hart, but above all, Shawn Michaels will face the champion Bret Hart for the title. Bret is about to go to WCW, and to make sure that he doesn't leave with the title to the enemy, Vince McMahon is going to force a finish that Bret Hart didn't know, which will enable Michaels to win. Bret got screwed. It is the infamous Montreal Screwjob. Vince, who was in ringside for this scene, got spit on by Bret, who will even punch him backstage. The first thing to highlight is that fans are going to see Vince McMahon as the mastermind of this scheme against Bret Hart. The second is that initially Vince and the officials intended to hide his black eye after this incident and make people forget about it best they could. But Vince Russo said they had to follow up on it, that it was real, and that it was exactly what could captivate the spectators. From there, we have a very important switch. On the screen, Vince becomes Mr. McMahon, the official owner of the company, which he already was in real life, but he had never had that role on screen before. The ultimate authority figure who screwed Bret Hart. This is the first time he was in this position on the shows, and yet everything starts from a real-life situation, namely Bret Hart's upcoming departure for WCW. Unexpectedly, the Federation just created one of its biggest heels. You should know that the officials Bruce Pritchard and Pat Patterson were already trying to convince Vince that he was a heel for a while, while on the one hand, due to the circumstances, they had created a rebel loved by the fans, Stone Cold Steve Austin. On the other, they now held, in Jim Ross' words, the best heel of the Attitude Era, Mr. McMahon. The big question at that moment is how will the destinies of these two very strong characters mix up? We will have a first answer on January 18th, 1998. One day earlier, Steve Austin had just won the Royal Rumble for the second time. And on Raw, the Federation got a visit from the world's most famous sportsman in 1998. The boxer Mike Tyson. He will be welcomed into the ring by Vince McMahon, but Stone Cold will come and put his nose in his business. I would like to take this opportunity to say that when Jim Ross says on commentary that business is about to pick up, I love it. These are typically the kind of comments that involve you even more into a scene, and that's the added value of a Jim Ross. In any case, Stone Cold doesn't like the fact this star is coming in his yard. The situation will escalate and make a lot of people talk. As Vince Russo says, Tyson put them on the map. He attracted all the eyes to see Stone Cold in this legendary scene. Vince McMahon will have an extraordinary acting when he yells at Austin that he ruined everything. The least we can say is that the two men don't like each other. What's really great about this angle between these two characters is that even without being the main attraction of the show for now, it didn't prevent it from being some kind of shadow above the other Stone Cold rivalries. In this case, it was his feud against Shawn Michaels for the WrestleMania 14 main event, where Austin will have a title shot. The situation is very interesting because we have Mike Tyson, who is siding with D-Generation X, Michaels' faction, who will referee the match. That puts Austin in a position where he must once again overcome obstacles. But in addition, during this period, Vince McMahon will admit that he didn't want Stone Cold to become champion. He thinks that with his beers and middle fingers, he would be a nightmare in terms of public relations for the company. And that's really exciting. Knowing that the boss who screwed Bret Hart in Montreal doesn't want Stone Cold to win, we immediately wonder if Vince will end up screwing Stone Cold to make him lose. How would he react if Stone Cold won? Will Stone Cold stay true to himself facing all these obstacles? First of all, at WrestleMania 14, Stone Cold will become champion for the first time. It is also a match that the Texas Rattlesnake didn't like. The Undertaker stayed at gorilla position all match, ready to intervene to make sure that Michaels let him win, the Heartbreak Kid not being the most reliable guy at that time. So now we are in the situation that McMahon feared. Stone Cold is now the poster boy of the company. In the press conference after WrestleMania, he congratulated the new champion who obviously has character. Not necessarily a character that the Federation appreciates, but the fans do. Then we will enter a new phase of the rivalry where Vince becomes the main antagonist of Stone Cold. The crazy thing is that in reality it kind of happened by default because, as the official Bruce Pritchard tells us, they needed an angle to keep Stone Cold busy while waiting for Mick Foley to be ready to feud against him. So that's why in the weeks after WrestleMania we had these segments of Stone Cold with Mr. McMahon. The latter was only supposed to be a short-term character. However, the substance of this angle was super interesting in my opinion. Vince wanted to make Steve Austin more corporate, politically correct, and we will have brilliant segments like the one where Stone Cold arrived in a suit on April 6th, 1998. He made Vince believe that he had changed while not at all. Since the Rattlesnake refuses to submit to his vision, McMahon will have only one obsession: to do everything in his power for him to no longer be the poster boy of his company. The amazing thing is that, as we said, this story was supposed to last for a very short time, but they're going to have a good surprise that will change all the plans. The April 13th Raw, where Stone Cold wanted to face Vince in the main event of the show, will have 4.6 million viewers. For the first time in almost 2 years, they beat WCW. So the message is clear. Viewers love this angle between Vince and the Rattlesnake, so they shouldn't just make it a short-term rivalry like what was planned. By doing this, they will also beat their competitor more and more often in the ratings. In this Raw, where this match was supposed to happen, what is even crazier is that Vince had never wrestled in a ring. Despite his desire to become a wrestler, his father and former boss of the company was always against it. But in the end, this match will not take place as we could have imagined at all. First of all, Stone Cold will be forced to face him with one hand tied behind his back. But above all, while we are finally expecting to see this match, Mick Foley arrives in his Dude Love character, who is going to turn against Austin. So in the end, the match won't even take place. Incidentally, for the record, this idea of having a match and then having Dude Love interrupting it comes from the interviewer Kevin Kelly. He was having lunch with Vince Russo. The latter wanted them to talk together because he was out of inspiration, and Kelly was the one who visualized this whole scene. Obviously, there were reasons to be frustrated, but I think it was a good choice. Not only did it enable to keep the match between Vince and Stone Cold for later, and to have even more hype among the fans for the day it really happens, but for the first time we had the idea that Vince would choose a representative to execute his plan. As Foley says, he is the guy who ruined the best episode of Raw ever. Honestly, when I saw Stone Cold and Vince McMahon face to face in the ring for the first time, I saw a big chemistry. They are two credible and charismatic characters. We believe in the hatred they have for each other. As Stone Cold himself says, their rivalry was magical. They both have the same passion and the same feelings about this business. I also love this idea of having on the one hand a character ready to do anything to make his nemesis fail, and on the other a hero who will have to overcome all obstacles for his quest, namely to remain the champion. As for Vince McMahon, he explains the success of this feud by saying that it was a clash between two strong personalities, but also by saying that he grew up in a caravan not even 9 feet wide. Even with a lot more money, he was still the same guy. He understood ordinary people because that's who he was too. When he was a kid and people acted like they were better than him, it also pissed him off. The Stone Cold character is who he was inside. It was pretty easy for him, understanding the whole psychology of it all, to be the opposite of that, to play the kind of guy he hated when he was a kid, who says he has more money than us, who belittles us. His childhood was really hard, but it taught him a lot. It's interesting to note that, according to him, the Stone Cold character is like him because in his life he was always been a rebel who broke all barriers in wrestling. For him, Steve Austin was the right character at the right time, and Vince Russo confirms it by saying that we had two excellent performers who played very well together. They had a story that was very, very well written. and Austin said and did everything that everyone wanted to say and do to their boss. It's not about wrestling and 5-star matches. Everyone was watching the show because Stone Cold was the man of the people who said no to authority. In the end, we can say that it is a rivalry that captivated a lot of spectators because it could speak to any person who had a boss who made him angry in his daily life. As Jim Cornette also says, the audience was captivated by Austin because he was so real, and they believed in him after that there will be a period when Mr. McMahon will really try everything to end the Rattlesnake's reign, and the first soldier he will use in this war is therefore Dude Love. A funny detail is that Foley is going to write the letters VKM with a heart on his shoulder, for Vincent Kennedy McMahon of course, at the Unforgiven pay-per-view on April 26th. There will be a match between Steve Austin and Dude Love, during which Vince will be in ringside with the risk that he will do as he did to Bret Hart a few months before. Stone Cold will hit Vince by accident with a chair, and he will get out of this trap in the end, but the following weeks will be more and more complicated. On Raw, on May 18th, he will have a match against the Stooges, Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe, who are in a way Vince's lackeys. In this match, a masked man will arrive from the crowd, climb the security fence and end up attacking Austin with a chair. We discover afterwards that in reality, it was Vince, typically an example of the creativity at that time. Besides, on May 25th, the Rattlesnake managed to have McMahon and his stooges arrested by the police in a hilarious scene where he poured his beer on the big boss head. At the Over the Edge pay-per-view on May 31st, Mr. McMahon will go even further in his vicious side to make Stone Cold lose at all costs. In his match against Dude Love, Vince will be the referee, Patterson will be the announcer, and Briscoe will be in charge of the bell. Fortunately, to counterbalance this scheme, The Undertaker will come at ringside to help Stone Cold personally. I loved that match where Dude Love and Austin went all over the arena. I was also a fan of that decor with all those cars, and Stone Cold is always so fierce in the way he moves that a simple punch is entertaining. The finish will also be original with Dude Love, who will accidentally hit Vince with a chair. Taker, who will put the Stooges out of harm's way at ringside. Stone Cold, who does his move on Dude Love, and then he will pull a dizzy Vince towards him and do the 3 count using Vince's arm. Once again, Mr. McMahon's plan had failed, but he's not going to give up. Now that nothing happened as he hoped with Dude Love, he will use a new and much scarier wrestler, Kane, this masked monster who had started a few months before and who was almost invincible. Kane will become the new contender for the title, and for his upcoming match against Austin at King of the Ring, there will be an even harder stipulation for task for Stone Cold. It will be a first blood match. The first one who manages to make the other bleed wins, except that Kane is masked and wears an outfit in which his skin isn't exposed at all. So how could the Rattlesnake manage to make the monster bleed? Again, this is an exciting situation where we think that Mr. McMahon may have finally found a way to screw Austin. It should also be emphasized that in the build-up, Kane said that if he lost this match, he would literally set himself on fire. He also caused a shower of blood to fall on Stone Cold at one point. These elements made him even more threatening and gave an unpredictable side to this match, which was clearly one of the big strengths of the Attitude Era.
He just said the sun and the blood on you will be for real. Wow. What else does this monster?
In this 1998 King of the Ring, the first blood match between Kane and Stone Cold is going to be chaotic, with the Hell in a Cell cage which was still there since we also had the historic match between The Undertaker and Mankind, and which was going down and rising in the middle of the match. Taker and Mankind came to create even more chaos. In the end, The Undertaker will accidentally kick the Rattlesnake, which will make him bleed and lose this match. Mr. McMahon could gloat because he finally achieved his goal. After 98 days of reign, Stone Cold is no longer champion. The next day, on Raw, Vince McMahon, with beautiful white shoes that he proudly wore, can present the title to his new champion, Kane, and then we can ask ourselves several exciting questions. How will Stone Cold react to all these tricks that cost him his title, which is more important than anything for the competitor he is? How will he be able to vanquish his rival's vicious schemes against him? Will he be able to regain the title and have a real reign, or will the evil boss have the last word against the rebel? How will this angle between the two men, which the Wrestling Observer called the best rivalry of 1998, continue? You will have all the answers very soon. In the next episode, you will discover the continuation of this amazing rivalry, which will go even further into its unpredictable side with some iconic scenes. You will learn what Steve Austin was thinking in his head before the hilarious segment where he attacked Vince McMahon in his hospital room, how the Big Boss hurt his back by missing one of his most famous spots, and even how Vince Russo justifies one of the most controversial booking decisions of all time in any case. We have already been able to see how much this rivalry was the result of a long process. It is a story that has been brilliantly brought by constantly adapting to the circumstances, to ultimately become the great rivalry that will attract millions of viewers during this ratings war against WCW. By the way, Vince McMahon himself says that Stone Cold filled the arenas, that it enabled to break records in terms of sales of pay-per-views and merch. However, in March 1997, the Federation was doing a Raw in Germany that only attracted 1.9 million viewers, a very low rating at that time. We can say that this rivalry symbolizes the transition from a cartoon product to a more adult product, and I have a debate for you. Do you think this Attitude Era period was the best ever? Tell us what you think. It will be great to read your comments and share our opinions together. We can say that this rivalry is stupendous. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and I invite you to stay on the Paradise of Wrestling to look at some other ones. See you right away.
And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so. What?